long time, perhaps. Um, I think I forgot to do that. Sorry about that. Anyway, and he says in regard to this prajna that you could say that vipassana is the practice inspired by prajna. And this is actually, again, a paragraph that we could contemplate at length. One could say that vipassana is the practice inspired by prajna. Vipassana is the development of awareness, and prajna is the product of awareness. Once you practice and achieve vipassana, prajna is already there. With vipassana, you can work both on awakening and developing your intrinsic prajna. Awareness gives birth to prajna, but once you've achieved prajna, you continue to work with it. You don't stop there. So there's a real, you could say, feedback loop that develops at this point. If you're just thinking linearly, you might ask, well, which happens first? And the answer is it really doesn't matter, because one feeds the other. That as we open to our awareness and open to the world through vipassana, this, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Awakens our prajna as well. And then our prajna furthers the sense of opening, furthers the sense of expansion, furthers the sense of awareness. So that again, this knowing quality of mind develops further and further in that to greater expansive awareness of the world around us. He also talks about this first prajna principle being connected with learning, but that it doesn't just mean using your ears, it means using all your senses. For instance, when you hear a Dharma talk, you may smell the incense burning on the shrine, maybe not virtually, but if we were meeting in person. You may see, after you burn incense, you have a memory of that and a connection with the teachings you heard in that setting. You feel the Dharma. When you receive teachings in a certain environment, you may be dressed in a certain fashion. You have the physical feeling of sitting on the meditation cushion. So feeling and smelling are part of hearing the Dharma. You use sight. You look at the person who's talking to you. And in traditional shrine rooms, you might also have other visual aids, like banners showing Dharmic symbols or representing the idea of the Dharmic kingdom. So that it's possible to create a Dharmic world in which every aspect of your sense perception is used. So that again, this knowing quality of prajna includes the fullness of human experience. Everything in such an atmosphere is real and direct and simple. In such an atmosphere where there's no time off, you can learn so well because you're present. And the Dharma becomes part of your daily existence. So the first prajna is experiencing with your whole body, with all your sense perceptions, that everything you do in life is connected with Dharma. Learning involves your whole being. So you can study, and so with this first Dharma principle, you can study and learn. And if you study, you're a good practitioner, you could transmit what you learn to others. Because you're not expected to just work on yourself alone. You can expand to the world outside yourself. And in this sense too, this being the final talk in the Hinayana chapter, we're anticipating the Mahayana, where we do work with the world around us and work with the expansion of awareness to work with all situations and all beings. And he says, learning in this way, you begin to feel there's no mystery. You could explain everything. You can understand how things happen and why they work in a certain way because the teachings are so thorough and full and real. And he says in the case of Dharma, when students have studied and learned most of the information, the rest is awakened intrinsically. This is so because teachings begin to connect us with our basic existence. Again, our true fundamental nature and their karmic connection to a dharmic person. And he says with this, you should not feel inadequate. You should perk yourself up and realize that you're a great vessel of Dharma. And that joyousness comes from training your mind in the shamatha discipline of mindfulness and vipassana discipline of awareness. You make a connection with Dharma as a family heirloom. And this is because our minds are open. And this comes from meditation practice and study, that we're open to our experience. We're open to the full range of emotional experience, our experience through the senses, as well as what we learn, into what we might learn conceptually or intellectually. And it becomes a way of connecting fully with the Dharma, because we're not caught up in preconception. We're not caught up in habitual pattern. We're present and available to learn. So the Dharma makes you feel genuine and real. You possess Buddha nature, and you'll reawaken that family heirloom, which is quite rightfully yours. And the teacher's role at this point is to make sure you understand that. So that's hearing, which is the first aspect of prajna. The second one is contemplating, or sampa, which means thinking about or having thought about it. And here he says the mindfulness of your shamatha discipline has prepared the basic ground during post-meditation experience as well as during sitting practice. And again, I think this comes back to our ability to simply be present and simply feel how we're feeling in the moment, be with our experience in the moment. So this becomes the basic ground that we work with. And beyond that, we have vipassana awareness, which is the ability to open ourselves with awareness to the world around us. So that we're contemplating the Dharma and relating with ourselves. And he talks about this in terms of disgust with samsara in particular. In contemplating the Dharma and relating it with yourself, you experience a feeling of disgust with samsara. And at the same time, you begin to appreciate yourself as a dharmic person. He says you're picking up a sense of atmosphere, which there's something you heard, but you can't quite click into, but you feel like you're about to understand. And this experience comes after you've heard and studied the teachings. You have a sense that you're about to get it, but you can't understand it fully. But at this point, he says, the best approach, and again, this is clear instruction as to how we can approach this. The best approach is to raise your confidence in yourself and your connection with Dharma and the reason you came into the Dharmic world altogether. You just contemplate what you've heard in a very simple, ordinary way. And he gives an example that you may have heard one of the definitions of Dharma as passionlessness. And then you might have heard another definition of Dharma, that it's the development of peace. So you might be puzzled by the word passionlessness and how that connects with peace. And he talks about different ways you might work with that, different things you might do, but in particular with contemplation, instead of calling up a professor, or I guess now, at the time he was doing these teachings, there wasn't an internet, but that would be something you would do nowadays. But he says, instead of doing that, you think back to when you first heard those teachings. You remember the particular environment where the teachings were presented to you. When you heard the Dharma, all your senses were involved. So years later, you can reflect on that environment and that particular presentation. You can think about the smell that was in the room. The Dharma is passionless, the passionlessness, it is peace. You remember the sounds, you remember how it felt. You remember how it looked, and you can reflect back to that. Through that process, you come to an understanding that passionlessness also means peace. You understand that when there is no passion or grasping, you are contented. Therefore, your mind will settle itself. So finally, you're able to put passionlessness and peace together. So again, it comes back to, in contemplation, thinking about all of our experiences with Dharma, our experience with meditation, our experience with teachers, our experiences in life, and making that kind of a connection so that, as in the example he gives, we come to make a connection between passionlessness and peace in terms of not grasping and letting mind settle in contentedness in the present moment. He says with this that Dharma is never taught outside of the right circumstances, that it only makes sense in the right circumstances, that it has to be taught by a confident teacher, that it then makes sense to you in that very moment. When there isn't that kind of when there's disconnected circumstances, it becomes self-secret. But basically, contemplation means tracking back. It means coming to a personal understanding. So it's important to reflect on the occasions and circumstances in which you've heard the Dharma. So then the third aspect of prajna is meditation. This gampa, which means meditating on. And in this context, says that meditation is thorough involvement, whereas contemplation is convincing yourself or committing yourself to the situation. And he gives a really good example of this a little bit later in this section. But basically he says, when you've heard, what you have heard and what you've contemplated should be taken into your heart properly and thoroughly. For instance, you might reflect on the nausea, pain, ugliness, and savageness of samsara. You begin by contemplating that, but then you take it into your heart completely. Beyond sitting practice alone, you're bringing these teachings into your heart. And he says this might bring you overwhelming experiences of all kinds. You will look at the wretchedness of samsara. You might feel wretched yourself. You might feel trapped. However, that kind of temporary experience or discovery is supposed to be extremely necessary and good. We're not particularly recommending that you freak out, but that's the way it is. And he says, in presenting the Dharma, we're talking about a black and white world. You should realize that it's not a question that everything is all right. In fact, there is darkness and there is light. And that basically with prajna or discriminating awareness, you see that samsara is black and quite terrible, and freedom from samsara or nirvana is extremely white and immaculate. You have to face that fundamental Hinayana truth. And I actually wanted to read in this regard a section from another talk that kind of covers the same point. This is a part of actually a talk to a Vajrayana audience, so it's not all, I don't know that it's publicly available, but this particular piece relates directly to this sense of renunciation. As you know, devotion is the head of meditation, and renunciation is the foot of meditation. That what makes you keep moving on the path. I'm sure that you're not all that stupid, and I don't have to spell out the whole thing, but just in case. Renunciation doesn't mean that you have to hate yourself, hate your parents, hate electricity or the telephone, or motor cars, or that you have to look for some kind of a simple yogic life necessarily. Well, that could be a dream world, but it's not possible for us. Renunciation doesn't mean developing that kind of hatefulness toward everything, but renunciation is knowing nostalgia for samsaric comfort is full of shit, and it contains profound poison behind it. It destroys yourself and it destroys others. It creates passion, aggression, and ignorance, and the destruction of the whole world. So you have to realize the basic unwholesomeness of the samsaric world as purely a matter of fact and simple logic. The only function of renunciation is to develop that kind of attitude, so the fundamental nostalgia is cut through. When that kind of nostalgia is cut through, when the sense of commitment to the samsaric world and pleasure has been seen to be unwholesome, then you are siding yourself toward the other, which is wakefulness. That yearning towards wakefulness gives you the chance or strength to connect yourself with wisdom when it occurs to you. Of course, you've missed it hundreds of times in the past. We all did. And there's a chance you might miss it 100 times in the future. But if you catch it once or twice, it's better than nothing. You always have to begin from the beginning. So this is what we're talking about here. And again, we're talking about kind of a fruitional or a culmination of Hinayana, where we reverse our attitude towards samsara, we reverse our attitude towards samsaric attachments. And that this comes through developing the prajna that sees clearly how the world works, how our mind works, how we work, so that we're able to let go, so we're able to renounce. And that these become very powerful experiences of samsara and wakefulness and compassion and so on. As I said before, I think he gives a really good example of, I think this is a really good example of what he means when he says meditation is thorough involvement, whereas contemplation is convincing yourself or committing yourself to the situation. I think this is exactly what he meant in terms of thorough involvement, but that develops out of contemplation. He goes on to talk about overcoming the kleshas and says you could fall into a subtle attitude of rejecting negative or crazy states of mind, but in fact, we learn to use those, that we can learn to use those to wear them out. And again, this is another way of approaching renunciation, that we come to fully see what it means, what happens when we act on passion, aggression, and ignorance, what happens when we get caught up in habitual patterns, what happens when we have these moments of mindlessness, and make a commitment, in fact, to working with ourselves to wake up and to realize our, basic goodness, our fundamental awake quality, the fundamental knowing quality of mind. So with the first prajna, you're hearing, you're studying and learning. With the second, contemplating, you're sharpening your knowledge. And with the third prajna, meditation, your knowledge becomes workable. But he says, in fact, none of these disciplines can arise unless you become a refugee and practice shamatha vipassana, because shamatha vipassana creates the fundamental ground where we're able to make these discoveries and open ourselves to prajna awareness, so that we're able to open up. That shamatha vipassana discipline brings out tremendous power in us. It sharpens prajna and brings out your restraint. And he says, you shouldn't be afraid to be sharp. Prajna is both sharp and gentle. And he uses as an analogy, when your knife is sharp, it's very easy to cut meat. You just go over it lightly and the meat is separated. So the sharper it is, the gentler it is. And it's this very sharpness of prajna that in a very gentle way allows us to let go, allows us to open up, allows us to be fully awake and experience this clear and knowing quality of mind. So as I say, I think there's a lot in this chapter, there's a lot, perhaps even more that could be said, but I think I'll stop there and have time for questions and discussion. Meg?
It's just a comment. Kurt said to me earlier today that the last chapter, that he wished that he had read that chapter before the whole book, because it's sort of a nice explanation of the whole thing. And I agreed with him. It's just, it feels like it sums up the whole book pretty nicely.
Well, we could start again.
Can you say more about how it sums up the whole book?
Oh, go ahead, Kurt.
Or Kurt? Either.
Yeah.
Anything.
Are you there, Kurt?
For me, it really brought home the reason we're studying all of this. And I guess it had such a practical sense to it in life. And I don't know, I think at the beginning of this, I was studying it just for the act of studying it. And it was more of an intellectual exercise rather than a real life exercise. And so this last chapter just, it brought it all home. It made me want to go back and really, I don't know, it had me feeling the teachings opposed, in my body, opposed to just this idea of the intellectual and memorizing it and trying to figure out all these terms and whatnot. It kind of took that pressure off and gave me a sense of this is something that I already have, and it's waking it up. It was just, it was the last half of the last chapter that seemed to bring it all home.
Well said. I felt the same way. It really reminded me of being in Trungpa Rinpoche's presence, actually. And of course, that's exactly what he says. You try to really evoke the whole experience, that it's not just an intellectual exercise. So Fred had his hand raised, and then Karen Sue.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I had the same experience as Kurt and Meg. Like, I was reading this chapter and I'm like, this should have been first. And John's question of why, like what pushed it for me is like the fact that it's like this remembering, like you remember these parents that you had, but they've forgotten about you. And also like the remembering of the Dharma talk with like the senses. And it's almost like, there's like a subtle way this is like passed down. That was my experience of that.
Thank you. Karen Sue?
I'm just wondering if you feel that way because you've read all the chapters before. So, hindsight's 20/20, I guess, but I too felt a real clarification in this chapter. But I look back on all the others that prepared me to receive this chapter. So just something to think about.
I think that's a good point.
Mhm.
Robert?
Thank you. It's interesting that this made a reference to parents because I could certainly agree with the analogy that there's things that I appreciate about my parents now much more than when I was a child, and that I thank them for. And all the things they told me then, I wasn't hearing it. I wasn't hearing it in any way, no way. And to hear this now, there's a greater appreciation for it because of the experience we've got leading up to it.
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
Because of the experience we have leading up to hearing it.
Yes. Yes.
Can I ask, all these comments make the question come up, what is it that is so powerful that you're hearing? Kurt or Meg or Robert or anybody?
One of the things that was very powerful for me to hear was about not being ambushed by preconceived ideas, but first thought, best thought. And that comes down to, for me, is trusting myself right here, right now. And in the expansion of awareness to work with all beings in all situations. It's very profound. It's a complete expansion of consciousness to me. There's a word for it. Escapes me right now. The ability to work with all things all the time. Equanimity. And if I'm second guessing myself, how am I going to do that? I think I'm getting ambushed by other people, but it's really my own second guessing that's doing it.
I think it's the heart for me. It's the taking the teachings to heart that was so profound, and it's like what a wonderful way to end this, this chapter with the heart. And I think that that's why that feeling of, gee, if I had read this chapter first, because I had that same feeling, it comes from the heart. And that was very profound for me.
Dan has his hand raised.
Has his hand raised. Dan.
Yeah, thanks. Going back to the beginning, I was thinking along the lines that of what Karen Sue said, that that I have that feeling too, but I probably wouldn't have felt that way if I hadn't read everything before that. Also, Michael said third time reading his chapter. I haven't read this volume 3 times, but I've read other things from other teachers least 3 or 4 or 5 times, and I always have that same feeling. And at the end, I wish I had read this part first. So it happens every time, over and over. And also, I like that thing, Michael, you made it clear too about the ambush. It's, and what struck me about that is that there's a paradox there, because I think we hold on to our old ideas. I hold on to my old ideas with the illusion that that's what's going to keep me from feeling ambushed. It gives me a sense of control. And I know that's delusional, because it's really the other way. You know, when I give up old ideas, that's when I'm not ambushed. But I hold on to them because I feel like I'm protected from feeling ambushed.
Yeah. Yeah, as one teacher that I remember hearing once, Khandro Rinpoche, said that part of the reason we hold on to some of these things is we mistakenly believe they work for us. And that it's only through really paying attention to our lives that we come to see that they don't. I was also remembering, as we were talking about a question and answer once with Trungpa Rinpoche, where somebody asked him about preconceived ideas and why wasn't that first thought? And he said, that's zero thought. So Kurt had his hand raised.
Yeah, and acknowledge that Tony had his up too. But when John asked what was powerful about it, this chapter, I think what really brought it home for me, and maybe this is, I don't want to say easy, but Meg and I have this in common, that we're both artists, and we talk about this a lot. And these ideas and ways of being are what we are constantly struggling with and then living with in our art practice, of that first thought, best thought, is that clear vision before we second guess ourselves, and the preconceptions of what a good piece of art is. And so it was very analogous to our art practice. And that's just the life that we live. And I'm just curious if that is, that shows up with those that cook. That's like first thought of a spice to put in, or or shopping, or Jane has mentioned it many times in her discussions in her work, that she's so present. And so I think that's what really drove it home also, as being a very powerful chapter, as it's related, or I guess maybe for the first time related it so clearly to our day-to-day life.
Interesting question. Tony?
Hi. One of the things that really brought it home for me is when he said again, so the idea is not to reject evil and encourage goodness in the crude sense, but to make use of your neuroses as a way to climb to the castle of liberation. That's a remarkable statement to me, that your obstacles become your opportunities, that, to work with those things, where the past becomes a lesson rather than a life sentence. I just love the way he can bring all this in together, bring it all in, and say, we can work with this. We can work with all the negativity. We can work with everything, and we can learn from it and grow from it. So that particularly resounded with me today. Make use of your neuroses as a way to climb to the castle of liberation. Thank you.
I see Vicky has her hand up.
Yeah, what you just said resonates with me. When confusion dawns as every morning.
Can't hear
That-
you.
That when confusion dawns as wisdom. Well, we're saying that, you know, twice a day, every day, and that's sort of what it is for me. The confusion and the pain and the overwhelm, there's a reason for it. It's to dawn as wisdom. So.
Yeah.
There's an awake quality even in our confusion.
It's kind of reassuring. There's a purpose for it.
To me, there's this quality of coming home, back to a quality of wholesomeness that I've forgotten. We've gotten caught up in unhappiness and neurosis and complaint. And with prajna and vipassana, there's this quality of coming back to, like, you know, rediscovering the parents within me, the wholesomeness, quality of appreciation and love of this world. And I think prajna is very much connected with that. Yeah.
Fred?
With the coming back, what just came to mind is, you know, like the anti-prajna be like the rejecting of one's experience or pushing it away, like this isn't happening. I can't believe this, and repeating that ad infinitum, and that could create like the separation from the proverbial parents, and that could.
I think that what he says in the very beginning, we have a tendency to indulge in our stupidity, which makes us feel homey and comfortable. Indulging is easy to do, and we tend to get into that state too often. But then eventually we realize that it becomes a hassle. But yeah, I think that to the extent that we can practice developing our prajna, we can practice deadening our prajna, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't know why you'd want to do that.
What's that?
I don't know why you'd want to.
I'm not recommending it. But I think that's what he means when we talk about indulging in our stupidity. Right at the beginning of the chapter.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
But as he says, we can afford to open the window and experience the world outside.
I'll go. This is maybe lighter than the other topics, but a year ago, I was teasing John that the age of transmission was over since everything was happening online. And I just thought of it again. And I do wonder what the import will end up being of all the time in isolation, even if it's together alone. But the passage on hearing, that really came up for me again. Like, I don't have smells associated with the practice since I'm in one of two rooms I'm going to be in. And I was just made me think a little bit about, right, the difference of the past year plus that we've been having this conversation versus other times.
No, it's an interesting point. I'm getting more used to trying to teach through Zoom as opposed to being with people in the same room. It's a challenge. And yet it seems to work at the same time.
At the same time, there have been some people who've suggested to me that we have a group retreat.
I was going to
in person. You know,
I thought about that.
We could do it at Karmi Churling, or we could do it at Shambhala Mountain Center. And I'm thinking about it. I mean, we could for this particular Sangha, or maybe make it broader, do a group, a week ton, where we all sit together for a week. Wouldn't that be radical?
Great idea. I see a thumbs up.
Yeah. Well, this is really the beginning of the Mahayana. I mean, prajna and compassion are the two key qualities of the Mahayana, and they come through discovering egolessness, which really means learning that this reality that we live in right now, here, this is the real world, not the world of our dreams, which come and go. And that when we begin to move into this real world, then prajna becomes more significant, because it's the quality of seeing the world clearly, without our judgments, without our preconceptions. Prajna, is an intensifier, like a superlative, and jnana is the root to know. So it's kind of superior knowing. And it's one with this whole space that we inhabit. It's not something that we have like a faculty so much as it's just the quality of the world that we can come back to out of our dreams. And this world is very clear, sharp. It has this quality of knowingness, the objects of the senses. And then compassion comes along with it, and it's the quality of letting be, appreciating, creating open space for things. And these are what we're going to be dealing with more and more in the Mahayana. When we go into volume 2, it's like we're moving through these volumes. But you'll go back again and again. I mean, I've heard this nostalgia, like maybe we should start over again at the beginning of the volume 1. I mean, this is the path. You constantly are sort of circling back and moving forward and circling back. Unless you're a really fast learner, there may be some here, what they call an instant realizer in the teachings. And maybe there are some, not me. But
Hasn't happened to me yet.
yeah.
We had spoken about starting again as a kind of separate line. I would hope that people seem quite enthusiastic about it. I certainly did, and I hope we don't forget that. One of the delights of it is experiencing all the roughness and subtleness, so and so on, and then coming to a point where you realize that which scared you most was your savior. That's one of the great things. Be reminded about that.
Philip?
So, can we do that? Can we start? Can we do a sideline? The beginning?
I'm not following the question, Peter.
Oh, that we had spoken earlier about the possibility there were a number of people in favor of having beginning from the beginning again, not as a substitute of anything, but I think even you said that it could maybe be done as a kind of side thing, sideline. You don't remember that?
Mm-mm.
Really? Does anybody remember us talking about saying, gee, it would be great to start over again? I'm the only one who remembers that?
Well,
Am I hallucinating? I don't think so. I know Meg. Is Meg here? I know she discussed it. She
I
said
think
something.
facetiously, Peter.
Yeah.
Oh, you did?
Well, I think there's also talk of going to the Shambhala teachings, instead of the Mahayana in between. So
we'll get to the Shambhala teachings, definitely.
So Philip has his hand raised.
Yeah.
Sure. I wanted to sidestep a little bit and move forward a little bit more and ask you, Michael, if you would pick up where you left off a couple of minutes ago You're reading on the bottom of 535, and John too had left off here. We can afford to open the window and experience the world outside. That is the first step toward developing prajna. But then on the next page, he goes on to say, in developing prajna, you are beginning to work with the alaya consciousness, a non-referential, clear consciousness that is neither religious nor non-religious. Through the practice of meditation, you could slide into alaya consciousness, cognitive mind at the highest level. I'd like us to talk about that a little bit so I could understand it more. I always ask about alaya consciousness. I'm particularly interested in how does that relate to the fifth Lojong slogan, rest in the nature of alaya, the essence?
Michael, you want to do it?
I'll start, and anything you want to add. I think it means the same thing at that point, by the way. There are different descriptions of mind in, different points in the, in Buddhism. And actually we'll encounter this, we should, in the Mahayana with this Mahayana school called the Yogacara. But basically they talk about 8 types of consciousness, and the 8th consciousness or fundamental consciousness is the alaya, and then the alaya vijnana. And the alaya vijnana is the storehouse for karmic tendencies, karmic seeds. But the alaya underlying that is just a fundamental awake quality of mind, fundamentally awake, clear, and knowing. And it doesn't have a bias either way, you could say. So that we're able to rest in that. It's clear, present, knowing mind that isn't conditioned in any particular direction, you could say, except it does have a bias toward awake, and with that orientation to compassion. So that, but it's not conditioned in the sense that we would, think of conditioning, I guess. It's open, aware, awake. John, maybe you could add to that, but that's my understanding.
That's very good. Alaya, there are many words that are used to describe or to label the absolute reality. Alaya is one of them. Alaya vijnana, which you've also heard of, alaya consciousness, it gets a little confusing because that's neurotic. But the word alaya alone, especially, refers to this space that we inhabit, in which arise all phenomena in the moment, only in the present moment. And all phenomena include the 6 knowables: sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touch, bodily sensations, and mental events. And so the alaya is usually translated as storehouse. It's also described as being the womb, like, where from which a baby comes, the womb, and also the graveyard, because all phenomena arise in this present moment, this space, and they disappear instantaneously back into it. This gesture is born and it's dying. These words are born and they're dying as they appear. They are all contained in this space that we inhabit, and that is the alaya. And another aspect of the alaya is that it is fundamentally intelligent. It has intelligence built into it in the space. Everything that arises is automatically known. You don't have to make an effort to hear these words. You can't stop it. You don't have to make an effort to see this gesture. It's there. That is the self-knowingness of the intelligence of the alaya. And we tune into that. And that contains accuracy. That accuracy is the quality of prajna. Prajna means that it's not screwed up by your thoughts of good and bad, hope and fear, all the things that we label things with, the passions. It's just crystalline, crystal clear in this space. Everything arises crystalline clear in the moment. And that is that crystalline quality is the quality of prajna. It reveals everything. So the Alaya, when we go back and we meditate, we put our minds into the Alaya, we are coming back to this open, clear space of awareness in which everything is arising and passing. Yeah, it goes by many names. It's called
That
the
was
Dharma.
very helpful. So if I could follow with another question, when we do the Vipassana meditation, that is the space, that is the neighborhood we're trying to inhabit?
Yes, we're coming back, resting in that space. Every time we just come back and we rest here. And the thing is, it's always here. So you see, the only effort is that moment of coming back. When you realize you were dreaming and you say, I'm going to come back. And then you're here and it's effortless. Effort, if there's any effort, it just obscures it. Effort is all about me. I. What am I going to get out of this? I. But it's already here.
And that's why so many teachings in the Mahayana and Vajrayana talk about recognition. It's not creating it, it's recognizing it.
Thank you.
And
Thank
to
you
go
both.
back to your question, this is a little dangerous. I should probably reread the talk first, but I'm remembering a talk on prajna by Trungpa Rinpoche where he talks about, in terms of your question about Alaya, where he kind of had a fairly extended metaphor, which I'll mangle if I try to go through the whole thing, but it was basically the idea of a projector running film, but you have a bulb, and the bulb itself, separate from the film, is awake, bright. I mean, even though the film might be running in front of it, but that actually there's, the Alaya quality is a sense of bulb that doesn't have a bias toward any particular drama that might be, being projected on the, by the frames of the film. And the frames of the film, again, it was a very extended metaphor, but it was kind of interesting in terms of, production of ego, projection, and literal analog projector. Someday some of these metaphors won't make sense to people anymore. But the idea is that we have this Alaya, this bulb, and you can take the bulb anywhere, he said, and you can light up your whole world.
Yes, he uses that metaphor in the second book. And this could be an example of how rereading it will make it sensible the next time around. Because the first time, it just confused me utterly. I think I understood what he was trying to say. And he ended the metaphor by saying, you can just take the bulb out of the projector.
Yep.
And
yeah,
that was the point at which I got lost.
Well, I think it's, yes, you can run into problems with metaphors too, but if we just think about our meditation practice and the experiences that we have in meditation of coming back and being awake, but it's not confined to sitting practice, we can have that anytime, anywhere. And that's, that experience of having the bulb, having that bulb with us all the time.
There was something else that he said in this chapter about the emphasis on confidence. And that is so important, and it becomes increasingly important through the teachings. The confidence that you actually have and possess the Dharma. Because when there's a lack of confidence, that colors your understanding. You may actually understand a lot, but then there's this feeling like, well, maybe I don't get it quite, and there's this feeling of slightly self-attack. That needs to go. And I've always quoted him as saying that how did he put it? Self-doubt is the Buddhist version of original sin. So as we practice these teachings, there's this feeling of freedom and confidence that we are actually understand it and can come to it, that is actually essential that we develop it.
If I may, John, it sounds like you're speaking about stream entry. So the 10 fetters in the suttas in the Pali Canon. Doubt of the Dhamma is one of the first 3 that goes before one enters the stream. So doubt of the Dhamma, identity view, and attachment to rites and rituals. Once those 3 fade away, one has entered the stream. So what you're describing, I think, is the 3rd fetter. and that's essential. Like one can't actually attain the nibbana without that happening. So yeah, thanks for sharing.
Hello? Hello?
Hello, Peter.
Good.
Peter, you're not muted. You are.
No, he isn't. Okay. What do you say we wrap it up till next week?
Sounds good.
And we have a discussion group tomorrow. And you're all invited. These discussion groups are really wonderful. Yeah, so I want to say that next week, there's going to be a talk on the chants by popular demand. And I think it might be useful for people to understand the chants better, how we chant, and with some examples of what some particular chants mean. And then the following week, we start volume 2, excuse me, of the Profound Treasury. So please get a copy. And right now, isn't Shambhala having a sale?
I don't know.
Yeah. You go to shambhala.com or to the publications. If you just put in put it all caps, Dharma Sun, all caps, S-U-N, right? Then 621, no spaces, no dots. When you go to checkout, 40% off. 40% off through
Wow,
June.
that's good.
Yeah.
40%.
That's from Choki Rinpoche, who is the oldest of the Mingyur and Tsoknyi and Chokti. He's the oldest brother.
So what's the number again at the end of that?
Dharma Sun 621. As Valerie said, think of the summer solstice.
I'll put it in the email that's going to go out to everybody. If you're not on that email list, let me know somehow. 621. And yeah, 40%, that's great. Because it's not cheap, these volumes.
Right, I just got the hardcover and the soft cover, 40% off. And that's his website too, Choki Rinpoche's website. He has some great teachings for free, whatever. Is dharmasun.org probably. Yeah.
And if anybody listens to podcasts, Judith Leaf, who is the editor of this book, she has a podcast, and it takes the essence of the teachings here, and it's only about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So it's called Dharma Glimpses with Judy Leaf. So just anybody who's into podcasts.
Well, what do you think, Michael? Should we do the dedication of merit?
Robert has his hand up.
Okay.
Thank you. Would you please talk a little bit about Dharma? I heard Dharma and passionlessness, and Dharma as a black and white world. Would you please talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think he described what passionlessness means in the chapter fairly well, where he talked about approaching life with less grasping, less desire, and how that essentially allows us to discover peace or contentment. Not contentment in like a broad sense, but very simple contentment in the present moment. It's, the contentment we experience when we're able to just settle with things as they are. So it's not like, a broad world, happily ever after, a world is wonderful contentment. It's a very simple sense of contentment right in the present moment with things just as they are. And that as well, as he says, connects with a sense of peace. Because if we accept things as they are, we can just be with things as they are, then we're not struggling. We're not struggling with to make the world different. We're not struggling to make things be different than they are. We're just at peace with things that they are. So passionless, that's how he related passionlessness and peace and contentment. But, I think that thing is, we can experience that in meditation practice if we just recognize it in meditation practice. At least for a moment.
Yeah, and now, and now, and now.
Yeah, exactly. Because as soon as we try to grasp it or recreate it, then we're doing something else, and we're not taking things as they are anymore.
Poof.
We're taking things the way we wish they were.
Yeah.
And that creates struggle, and that does not bring peace.
Thank you.
Okay, so I guess we'll close with the dedication of merit as soon as I find it.
I can do it here.
I think I got it.
Okay.
I just want to say the name of the teacher is Choki Nima. No, not just Choki. So.
Yeah, Choki Nima.
Choki Nima Rinpoche. Yeah.
Right. I guess we should do cacophony.
Whoa. Okay.
By this merit, may all obtain
omniscience, defeat all damning wrongdoing, stormy waves of birth, of age, sickness, and death. May I feel all beings, the confidence of the Buddhist sun, of the great east, Lotus garden, great wisdom, all the dark ignorant sentience be expelled, and all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Yeah, cacophonous gongs as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Good night. Thank you, Michael.
Thank
Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Michael.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Hi, Toby.